The air smelled faintly of fresh lilies, their sweet fragrance mingling with the warm hum of wedding music drifting from the reception hall. I could hear the soft rustle of the invitation cards I had spent hours designing, each curve of the script chosen with care, each envelope sealed with trembling hands. The gold accents I had painstakingly affixed now seemed to mock me, sparkling in the sunlight that poured through the hall's grand windows. I had dreamed of this day for years. Not for myself, but for my son, the boy who had grown into a man I had nurtured with every ounce of love I possessed. And yet, at that very moment, I realized that all my dreams were about to fracture in a single, cruel sentence. Her words pierced the air like glass breaking in my chest. "If you truly love us," she said, her voice sweet, but with a poison I could taste as surely as the tears that had already begun to sting my eyes, "you'll vanish before our wedding day." I blinked. I thought I had misheard her. My son's fiancée smiled that calculated smile, the kind that was meant to disarm, to hide the knife she held behind her back. My heart lurched, confusion tangling with disbelief. Could she really say this? Did she mean what I thought she meant? The world around me seemed to blur. The soft music became a muffled echo, the chatter of nearby staff faded into a hum, and all I could see were the flowers, the tables, the very life I had poured into this celebration. And the girl who had just asked me to disappear from it. My hands trembled inside the lace gloves I had bought for this day. Gloves meant to add a touch of elegance, a hint of dignity. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips, the subtle quiver of skin against delicate fabric. I wanted to reach out, to touch her arm and ask if she knew the weight of her words, but my body refused to obey. My lips, painted a faint rose, my favorite color, were wet with tears, a bitter, metallic taste mingling with the sweetness of lipstick. The room, the music, the lilies, they were all there, yet I felt untethered, as if I were floating above myself, watching a scene I could not intervene in. I wanted to speak, to cry out, but my voice caught in my throat. I could see my son standing beside her, silent, eyes downcast, and I realized with a crushing clarity that he would not defend me. That silence. It was heavier than any blow, colder than any winter night I had endured alone. For a moment, I felt time stretch, each heartbeat an unbearable echo, each second a reminder that my love, my sacrifices, my very presence, had been rendered optional in the lives of the people I had devoted myself to. Before I tell you what happened next, if stories like mine move your heart, please subscribe. It helps me keep sharing the truth we older women too often hide. I stood there, surrounded by decorations I had paid for, realizing I was the ghost in my own family's celebration. My eyes traced the gleam of the polished silverware, the soft folds of the table linens, the tiny floral arrangements I had carefully placed myself, and yet none of it felt mine anymore. Every moment of love I had invested seemed invisible, erased by a demand I could neither comprehend nor accept. My body remained rooted to the spot, hands clutching gloves that could no longer protect me from the hurt that had settled into my chest, a cold, heavy stone that would not lift. And in that frozen instant, I understood something profoundly painful. They didn't want me here. They wanted me gone. I have always believed that love is measured not in words but in the quiet, often invisible acts we perform for those we cherish. And I had given love in abundance. Long before the first engagement ring was even whispered about, I poured my life into my son, sometimes to the point of forgetting myself. After my husband passed, the house was silent, hollow in a way that made the air feel heavier than it had ever been. I spent nights listening to the soft hum of the radiator, imagining him sitting beside me, telling me everything would be all right. But he was gone, and so I turned all my love toward the small boy who had once wrapped his tiny hands around my finger and promised to always be my little boy. I became his world. I worked tirelessly to give him everything I never had. Sewing late into the night, mending clothes for neighbors, baking bread and pies to sell at the corner market. Anything to ensure that he would never go without. Every sacrifice I made was fueled by love. The kind of relentless, exhausting love that leaves your bones tired but your heart full. I missed birthdays, skipped meals, let my own small pleasures slip quietly into memory, all for him. I remember the first time I sold my grandmother's necklace to pay for his school fees. It had belonged to my mother before her, and before her mother. I had never thought I would part with it, But when I saw the worry in my son's eyes as he hesitated at the tuition office, I felt my heart twist. I handed over the necklace and kissed his forehead, whispering, "It's yours, all for you." That necklace, a piece of history, became a symbol of my devotion. Every loss was a gift, I told myself. Every absence of comfort I endured was a stepping stone for his future. Years passed. He grew from a boy into a man I could scarcely believe. And with that growth came new joys and new worries. I watched him stumble, fall, rise again. I became the silent guardian of his life, managing his medical appointments, offering advice he sometimes refused to take, paying for his first apartment when he moved out, cheering quietly from the sidelines. My sacrifices never felt like a burden, they felt like purpose. Then came the engagement. I should have been overjoyed. My son had found someone to love him, to walk beside him, to share life's burdens. And for a time I was. I offered to help with the wedding, covering costs I could barely spare, wanting only to see the day shine. I even sold a few heirlooms, things I had kept as memories of my husband, to fund parts of the celebration. My heart swelled at the idea of seeing my son happy, of being part of this new chapter. I imagined laughter, flowers, music, and the warmth of family gathered in celebration. I never asked for acknowledgement. I only asked to be present, to witness the happiness I had worked for all these years. Every invitation I addressed, every centerpiece I helped design, every dollar I quietly contributed, I did it out of love. And yet, as the engagement season rolled on, small cracks began to show. Invitations arrived with my name absent. Conversations that once included me now excluded me. My offers of help were brushed off with polite smiles that didn't reach the eyes. I could feel the weight of the growing distance, but I ignored it, telling myself I was imagining things, that love was sometimes complicated and messy. I poured even more love into my son, not knowing that my devotion had become inconvenient to others. Each act of kindness, each sacrifice, seemed to matter less and less. And then it happened. The words that shattered everything. "If you truly love us, you'll vanish before our wedding day." In that moment, I realized that love, no matter how vast, could not protect me from those who had no intention of honoring it. All the sleepless nights, the quiet tears shed in my kitchen, the jewelry sold, the meals skipped, the hours spent making sure he had everything he needed, none of it mattered. My presence, which I had offered as a gift, was now a threat in their eyes. And yet, I had never imagined that love could be weaponized against me. I remember sitting alone in the empty kitchen that evening, clutching the remnants of the necklaces and rings I had sold, tracing the delicate curves with my fingers. The house smelled faintly of baked bread, a scent I associated with home and safety. I had built this life with love, every brick a testament to my devotion. And yet, the foundation I had laid was being questioned, threatened, dismissed. And yet, after everything I'd given, I whispered to the empty room, voice breaking. They wanted only one thing, my absence. I cried that night, not just for the words spoken, but for the betrayal of a lifetime of love. It was a grief unlike any other, heavy and suffocating, the kind that seeps into your bones and refuses to leave. I had given my all to my son, and yet the world I had built around him was crumbling, threatened by someone who saw my devotion as a nuisance. Even in the heartbreak, though, there was a flicker of clarity. I realized that the love I had invested so freely was mine alone. It could never be erased, even if they wished to pretend I didn't exist. I understood, in that quiet aching moment, that my presence was a gift, yes, but it was also power. And the very thing they sought to take from me, the right to exist fully in my son's life, could become the catalyst for something greater. I had spent decades giving, sacrificing, and loving. And now, perhaps, it was time to recognize that the love I had given so freely was not weakness. It was strength. It was a shield, a foundation, and if I chose, a weapon. But more importantly, it was proof that I had never, ever, been invisible. It started with small things, things that, at first, I tried to dismiss. Little omissions, little silences. A smile that didn't reach the eyes. A glance shared behind my back. A whispered conversation abruptly ended when I entered the room. I told myself I was imagining it, that perhaps grief had made me overly sensitive, that I had simply hoped too much. But deep down, a seed of unease began to take root. The first sign was the invitations. I had designed each one, chosen every ribbon and font, arranged the color palette to reflect my son's tastes and his fiancée's dreams. Yet when the final batch arrived, my name was missing. My hands shook as I held the envelope, my eyes scanning the names, looking for even the faintest acknowledgement of my presence. There was nothing. I felt a chill settle over me, creeping down my spine like an unwelcome guest. I tried to laugh it off, muttering that perhaps it was a clerical oversight. But laughter felt hollow, and the pang in my chest refused to fade. Then came the phone calls. My son's fiancée had developed a habit of answering abruptly, only to whisper and cover the mouthpiece whenever I drew near. I could hear bits of sentences, fragments of laughter that didn't include me, the soft click of a line ending before a conversation could begin. It was as if the world was conspiring to keep me in the shadows, and I, despite every ounce of vigilance I had spent years cultivating, was being gently, deliberately pushed out. I noticed changes in finances, too. Small discrepancies at first, nothing overt enough to raise suspicion openly. A payment I hadn't authorized, a withdrawal slightly higher than expected, a ledger entry that didn't match my records. Each anomaly made my stomach knot tighter. I had always been meticulous with money, keeping track of every bill, every donation, every expense I had covered for my son's sake. These inconsistencies were not mere accidents. They felt purposeful, as if someone was carefully rewriting the story of my generosity without my knowledge. Even the way they spoke to me began to shift. Politeness remained, but warmth disappeared. When I offered help with decorations or asked about logistics, my suggestions were dismissed with a phrase so sweet it almost tricked me into thinking I was imagining malice. "Oh, don't trouble yourself, dear," they said, voices coated in saccharine tones, hiding the edge beneath. And still, I stayed quiet, my heart aching, my pride keeping me from confrontation. I began to notice the way my son looked at me, too. He avoided eye contact when she was near, a subtle downward cast of his eyes, a stiffness in his shoulders. I wanted to reach out, to ask him if he realized what was happening, if he knew what I was feeling, but his silence was a wall I couldn't penetrate. The absence of defense stung worse than any words could have. The boy I had raised, the man I had nurtured, who I had believed would always see me, was now complicit in this slow erasure of my presence. Even my own home, a place that had once felt safe and warm, became alien. I would walk into the living room and catch them exchanging a glance, a word barely audible, and the way they spoke, always careful, always measured, made me feel like an intruder in my own life. The trust one had built over decades. Trust in my family, in the home we had created together, crumbled quietly, and I realized with a jolt that the betrayal was happening in plain sight. And yet, I could not act, not yet. I did not know the shape of the danger fully, nor the scope of their intentions. I felt as though I were on the edge of a cliff, the ground crumbling beneath my feet, and all I could do was watch, wait, and listen. Every glance, every whisper, every omission was a brushstroke in a painting I was only beginning to comprehend, a portrait of deceit, framed in the very life I had built for love. The more I observed, the more patterns emerged. Bills were quietly redirected, phone calls kept from me, names and acknowledgments quietly removed. My heart, already tender from decades of giving, began to harden, not in anger but in focus. Something inside me shifted. I realized that grief could not guide me. Suspicion, sharp and uncomfortable, had to. I would need to pay attention to every detail, to read every expression, to catch every small act before it became irreparable. I remember sitting one night at the dining table, surrounded by receipts, ledgers, and the little reminders of the sacrifices I had made, trying to make sense of it all. The air was heavy with the scent of candles, meant to bring warmth to the room, but tonight they felt oppressive. I traced my fingers along the edges of my late husband's picture, seeking solace in the memory of a love that had been honest, uncomplicated, real. And as I looked, I made a quiet vow to myself. I would not disappear in ignorance. I would watch. I would learn. And when the time came, I would face the truth, even if it hurt more than I could bear. Truth, I realized, often whispers before it screams. And I was beginning to hear it. It was a quiet afternoon when I first truly understood the depth of the betrayal. I had been organizing some old receipts and bills, as I often did, trying to make sense of the strange discrepancies that had been gnawing at me for weeks. The sun filtered softly through the lace curtains, casting a delicate lattice of shadows across the floor, and for a fleeting moment, I allowed myself to think that perhaps I had imagined everything. That the omission of my name, the whispered calls, the financial anomalies, were mistakes, not malice. But the truth has a way of making itself known, even when we try to close our eyes. I was going through the wedding account records, trying to reconcile what had been spent versus what I had contributed, when I noticed something that made my stomach twist violently. Certain amounts I had authorized for decoration, catering, and floral arrangements had been rerouted. I checked the bank statements twice, 3 times. Every figure matched what I remembered giving, except for small transfers to accounts I didn't recognize. Names I hadn't authorized, institutions I'd never contacted. And then the realization hit. Someone had been quietly manipulating the finances, diverting what I had provided into places I could not trace. My hands shook as I held the papers, the tremor moving up my arms like a warning. I felt my pulse hammer in my temples, and I fought to stay seated, knowing that if I stood too quickly, my knees might buckle. I had given everything for this wedding, the money, the time, the love, and now it was being stolen from me, not in a robbery but in the quietest, cruelest way imaginable. I confronted her the next time I saw her. She smiled, polite and composed, but the sweetness in her eyes had sharpened into something predatory. "Oh, you must be tired, dear," she said, brushing my concerns aside. "Everything is handled." But the way she emphasized handled made it clear. The handling had been hers, not mine. My voice trembled as I asked about the missing funds, about the changes in documentation, about why my name had been removed from the guest list, and the accounts alike. Her response was smooth, practiced, designed to disarm me. "Don't worry, Mother. We're making things easier for you. Really, it's all for your own peace of mind." I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the papers across the room and demand that she look me in the eyes while she lied. But I held myself still. I watched her, memorizing every curve of her smile, every calculated blink, every gesture meant to soothe while it stabbed. And then I saw him, my son, standing beside her. My heart lodged itself in my throat. He didn't flinch. He didn't speak. He didn't even blink. He didn't defend me. It was worse than the words themselves. Her voice alone could have been endured, perhaps even forgiven over time, but his silence, that silence was the weight of betrayal. I had raised him to be compassionate, to understand the meaning of loyalty and love. And here he was, silently consenting to my erasure, complicit in the plan to remove me from the one day I had looked forward to for decades. I felt my knees weaken, and I sank into a chair, clutching the wedding invitation I had addressed, the ink smudged from my shaking hands. How long had this been planned? How long had they plotted, behind polite smiles and casual conversation, to make me invisible in the life I had built for him? The warmth in my chest, the pride in my son that I had nurtured for years, curdled into a bitter ache that left me trembling. And then I discovered the final piece of the puzzle. A folder hidden among some wedding paperwork she had carelessly left on the desk, revealed documents she had drafted, new financial arrangements, contracts excluding my name, signed forms redirecting funds into her personal accounts. Every signature, every notation, every figure was a testament to premeditation. My contributions, my sacrifices, my decades of devotion, had been quietly erased, overwritten, manipulated by the very person I had welcomed into our family. I held the papers close to my chest, tears stinging my eyes, and I realized I was shaking not just from shock, but from a growing, icy clarity. She had done this methodically, calculated every move to ensure I would be left out of every acknowledgement, every celebration, every memory of this wedding. And my son, my own son, had allowed it. He had let it happen. I could feel the rage building, a slow, simmering fire that contrasted with the heavy ache in my chest. I remembered every sleepless night I had endured to give him the life he deserved. I remembered the nights spent worrying over his meals, his homework, his dreams. I remembered every moment I had sacrificed for him, every little piece of my own life I had given so freely. And here, at the pinnacle of what should have been a joyful occasion. All of it was being dismissed, rewritten, stolen. It was then, in that quiet room filled with sunlight and betrayal, that I understood something vital. Disappearing was no longer just a demand. It was an opportunity. They thought they could erase me, remove me from the picture, make me vanish quietly. But what they could not erase was the knowledge I now possessed. What they could not erase was the fact that I had seen the truth, that I had watched their plan unfold, and that I could act. I did not speak to him that day. I did not accuse. I simply folded the papers carefully, placing them in a drawer where I could access them later. Every number, every signed form, every diversion of funds, documented, organized, preserved. I would not let this injustice go unanswered. And though the betrayal had shattered my heart, it also ignited something long dormant. A clarity that would guide the next steps of my life. As I left the room, I paused at the doorway and allowed myself a single, deliberate thought. I had been asked to vanish. Perhaps I would on my terms. Not as a victim, not as a ghost, but as a woman reclaiming the dignity, respect, and power that had been quietly stripped from her over years of giving and loving. That day, I realized the truth about my son, the truth about my daughter-in-law, and the truth about myself. And I understood, with a certainty that made my hands stop trembling for the first time in weeks, that love alone had not failed me. My awareness, my resolve, and my willingness to act wisely would be what restored me. He didn't even flinch when she said I should disappear. That silence was worse than the words. And from that silence, I learned everything I needed to know. That night, I sat alone in my quiet home, the hum of the city outside a distant murmur. The betrayal had left a hollow ache in my chest, but amidst the grief, something new began to grow. A clarity that I hadn't felt in years. I traced the edge of my late husband's photograph, his eyes kind and steady, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of purpose stir inside me. I realized then that disappearing did not have to mean surrender. Disappearing in their terms could be my strategy. They had believed that erasing me would render me powerless, invisible. But I had the advantage they did not see, knowledge. I knew the truth. I had seen every omission, every manipulation, every whispered plan. And if I acted with precision, if I chose my moment carefully, I could reclaim control. Not through anger, not through confrontation, but through deliberate action. I began quietly, meticulously. I gathered documents, receipts, and records. Anything that could serve as proof of the financial redirection and deliberate exclusion I had discovered. Every transaction was noted, every altered form catalogued, every signature preserved. I even started keeping a journal, recording subtle interactions, phone calls, and exchanges that could otherwise be dismissed as casual misunderstandings. This was my armor, my preparation, my unseen weapon. At first it felt strange, almost unnatural, to move from grief into planning. My hands had been trembling when I discovered the betrayal. Now they were steady, guided by determination rather than despair. I knew I needed patience. Patience to observe, to wait, to act at the precise moment when my presence, or absence, would carry the most weight. I reflected on my past sacrifices, not with bitterness but with acknowledgement. Every sleepless night, every missed meal, every coin I had spent, every word of advice given in love. It had all built me into the woman I was now. The woman who could see through deception, who could act with deliberate intention, who could turn a moment of vulnerability into a turning point for her own dignity. And yet this clarity did not erase the ache. I still felt the sting of my son's silence, the sharp edges of my daughter-in-law's calculated cruelty. But now, instead of letting it crush me, I allowed it to refine me. I became alert to every detail. The way she handled finances, the patterns of secrecy, the casual arrogance with which she assumed I would step aside. I began to see not just their plan, but the cracks in it, the opportunities one could exploit. I remember one particular night, sitting by the lamp with papers spread around me, the soft scratching of my pen marking notes in the journal, when I had a moment of profound realization. They had believed that love, my devotion, could be used as leverage against me. That I would act out of fear, or guilt, or obligation. But love, I discovered, could also be a shield. It could protect me from the fear of leaving, from the paralysis of despair. And love for myself, for the dignity I had carried all these years, could guide my next steps with precision and calm. From that night forward, I moved with quiet purpose. I spoke less, observed more. I watched for inconsistencies in their stories, noted every subtle attempt to isolate me, and catalogued them meticulously. I began thinking strategically about the wedding day itself, not with malice, but with a calm clarity that allowed me to plan for the moment they expected me to vanish. In private, I allowed myself small affirmations, whispered into the shadows of the house. I am not invisible. I am not powerless. I will act when the time is right. Each repetition fortified me, knitting together the frayed edges of my confidence that had been worn thin by years of devotion and recent betrayal. It was during these quiet hours that I realized the true power of patience. Rushing would reveal my hand. Acting too soon might diminish the impact of my absence. I had to be deliberate. I had to wait. Every document, every observation, every note I had made was a step toward reclaiming agency, toward transforming the humiliation of their demand into a demonstration of my strength. By the end of that week, I had not yet confronted them, nor had I revealed the extent of what I knew. But I had changed internally. Where there had been hurt, there was now resolve. Where there had been doubt, there was now strategy. And where there had been fear, there was a quiet, unshakable sense of control. I understood finally that the choice to disappear was not their power, it was mine. They had assumed I would vanish to satisfy their comfort, to step aside without resistance. But I would vanish on my terms, with intention and precision, leaving behind more than absence. A statement of strength, a testament to the woman I had always been, and a reminder that love, my love, was never something to be taken for granted. In that turning point, grief transformed into strategy. Pain became clarity. And a woman, who had spent decades giving everything she had, discovered that she could also take back her life without losing herself in the process. The morning of the wedding arrived, bright and golden, with sunlight streaming through the windows in long, forgiving beams. To everyone else, it was a day of celebration, of flowers and music and promises whispered into eternity. To me, it was the day I had prepared for in silence, patience, and careful planning. I had spent weeks gathering documents, confirming the discrepancies, quietly ensuring that my presence, or absence, would carry meaning far beyond what they expected. I walked through the house, my hands brushing over the furniture I had maintained for decades, over photographs of my husband and son, over the memories that had been quietly claimed by love and devotion. For a moment, I allowed myself to feel the weight of it all, the years of giving, the years of trust, the years of being unseen even when I had been everywhere. And then I let it go. Today was not about grief. It was about clarity, precision, and the quiet satisfaction of reclaiming my life on my own terms. I did not attend the rehearsal dinner. I did not help with the seating arrangements, nor did I check the floral arrangements, as I had done countless times before. Instead, I remained at home, meticulously preparing what I would leave behind. A package, neatly wrapped, containing the evidence of the deception, the receipts, the signed forms, the financial manipulations that had tried to erase me. Along with it, a note, a letter written in calm, deliberate handwriting, explaining the truth, laying bare the betrayal they thought I hadn't noticed. I thought of my son as I wrote the letter. I could imagine him glancing at it, feeling the weight of every sacrifice he had silently disregarded, every act of devotion he had allowed to be manipulated by someone else. It was not vengeance, it was visibility. It was proof that I had not vanished in ignorance. And it was also a gift. The chance for him to finally recognize what it means to take a mother's love for granted. By mid-morning, the house was quiet except for the ticking of the clock. I dressed carefully not for their eyes but for my own. My clothes were neat, modest, elegant. The lace gloves I had once worn to tremble in shock now fitting snugly on hands that had learned to act with purpose. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw not a woman diminished by betrayal, but a woman renewed by clarity, a woman who had discovered strength she did not know she possessed. And then, at the precise hour, I acted. I left the house quietly, carrying the package with me, and went to the venue, not to participate, but to ensure that my absence would be known, that my message would arrive in the way only truth could deliver it. The wedding hall shimmered in golds and creams, The flowers I had contributed now standing as silent witnesses, the tables perfectly arranged, the music softly playing. Everywhere, there was beauty, and everywhere, there was my touch, my labor, my love. I did not enter the hall. I did not sit among the guests. Instead, I delivered the package to the manager I had trusted to hand it directly to the couple at the appointed moment. Every step I took was deliberate, measured. Every heartbeat reminded me that I had reclaimed the power they tried to deny me. I had vanished, yes, but not in submission. I had vanished with purpose, leaving behind a trail of undeniable truth. When the letter and documents were opened, the consequences began quietly but irrevocably. I could only imagine the confusion, the panic, the realization slowly dawning upon my daughter-in-law and my son. The package contained everything. The proof of diverted funds, altered documents, the evidence that my presence had been deliberately excluded from the wedding plans. Every signature, every transaction, every small act of calculated omission was laid bare. And in that revelation, I had achieved what I had sought, not revenge, but acknowledgement. Not shame for its own sake, but clarity that the love I had poured into their lives could never be erased. I returned home after delivering the package, the sun dipping lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the rooms that had been mine for decades. I sat in the quiet, letting the stillness wash over me. I did not need to see their reactions. The act itself was sufficient. I had taken back the narrative of my life, reclaimed the dignity that had been threatened, and demonstrated that vanishing could be done with intention, with power, and with grace. Later, I would hear of the chaos that ensued at the ceremony. Guests whispered in confusion, vendors quietly tried to piece together what had happened, and my son confronted the truth in the only way he could. Faced with undeniable evidence, he could no longer pretend that my contributions, my love, and my sacrifices were optional, invisible, or irrelevant. I did not gloat. I did not celebrate their discomfort. I simply allowed the truth to exist, knowing it carried more weight than any words I could have spoken. In those quiet moments after the wedding, as the city settled into evening, and the music faded from distant memory, I realized something profound. My absence had power. It was not the absence they had demanded, a submission to their will, but an absence crafted by my hands, my mind, and my heart. And in that absence, I left a presence that could never be ignored. The truth, undeniable and unalterable. I had given them what they asked for. I had vanished, but I had done so on my terms. And in doing so, I discovered a remarkable freedom. Freedom from expectation, freedom from betrayal, freedom from the quiet oppression of being unseen. In reclaiming my life, I had also reclaimed my love. Not the love they tried to manipulate, but the love I held for myself, for my dignity, and for the life I had built over decades. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly, undeniably powerful. The days after the wedding were quieter than I had expected. The chaos of the ceremony faded, the music and laughter replaced by the soft, steady rhythm of life returning to its usual pace. I sat in my small apartment, surrounded by books I had collected over the years, the gentle scent of tea brewing in the kitchen, and for the first time in what felt like decades, I allowed myself to breathe. I did not feel victorious in a loud or triumphant way. There were no celebrations, no applause. What I felt was deeper, quieter, a profound sense of peace. I had given what was required, and yet I had not lost myself. I had vanished, yes, but I had left behind a presence that could not be ignored. The truth. And in that truth, I discovered something far more powerful than any acknowledgement from others could provide: freedom. I began to rebuild life on my own terms. I took long walks through the park, listening to the rustle of leaves and the songs of birds, noticing details I had once overlooked in the busyness of raising a family and managing crises. I reconnected with old friends, neighbors who had seen me through lonely nights and shared small joys. I started volunteering at the local community center, helping women who, like me, had devoted themselves to others at great personal cost. Their smiles, their gratitude, reminded me that my love had always had value, even if it had been taken for granted by those closest to me. Sometimes, my thoughts wandered back to my son. I did not hate him. That would have been a weight too heavy to bear. Instead, I felt a quiet sorrow for the choices he had made and the lessons he still had to learn. Love does not demand blind obedience, and I had learned that loving him did not mean sacrificing my own dignity. I could hold affection for him without allowing him to define my worth. That, I realized, was the true meaning of love, to nurture, yes, but never to erase oneself. I found joy in small things. The way sunlight spilled across my kitchen counter in the morning, the delicate aroma of bread baking, the sound of rain tapping against my window. Each day, I learned to be present for myself, to honor the life I had built and the sacrifices I had made, not as burdens, but as the foundations of strength that had brought me here. I reflected on the lessons of the past months. I had given decades of my life to love, to family, to care, and yet, when confronted with betrayal, I discovered a deeper strength within myself. I realized that love is not about vanishing for others, or allowing oneself to be erased for someone else's comfort. True love includes respect for oneself, as well as for others. It is steady, patient, and resilient. It is knowing when to stand, when to act, and when to walk away, carrying dignity as your shield. I had walked away from the wedding, but I had not walked away from myself. I had preserved my integrity, my love, and my voice. And that, more than any ceremony or acknowledgement, was the victory that mattered most. Now, in the quiet of my home, I understand that life is not about the moments others choose to celebrate you. It is about the moments you celebrate yourself, the choices you make to honor your own worth, and the courage to rise above those who would diminish you. I am no longer the woman trembling behind lace gloves, hoping to be seen. I am the woman who vanishes on her own terms, leaving behind truth, dignity, and an unshakable sense of self. If you were in my place, would you have walked away quietly, or made them face the truth? I want you to think about that for a moment, because it isn't always easy to choose courage over comfort, or dignity over obligation. I stood in a house I had built with decades of love, only to realize that presence alone could not protect me from betrayal. And yet, in choosing to vanish on my own terms, I discovered a freedom I never thought possible. Your story, your experience, your choices, they matter. They have power, even when it feels like the world doesn't notice. Sharing them can give strength to someone else, someone who feels unseen or unheard tonight. So I ask you, tell me in the comments. Would you have hidden in silence, or acted with the quiet strength you didn't even know you possessed? And if stories like mine move your heart, if you find courage in hearing about someone who refused to disappear, please subscribe to this channel. Because every story we share reminds us, and the world, that we do not vanish when we are pushed aside. We rise, we persist, and we reclaim our worth.